Meredith Sloan stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror of her in-laws' opulent suburban home. At 34, the face looking back at her seemed hollowed out, a shadow of the vibrant woman she'd been just months earlier. She smoothed down her navy blue dress, chosen carefully to hide how much weight she'd lost, and took a deep breath. "You can do this," she whispered to herself. "It's just dinner." But it wasn't just dinner. It was the first time she would be sitting at a table with her husband's family since getting out of the hospital 3 months ago. After losing the baby she'd fought so hard to carry, between the tests, the bed rest, the emergency procedures, and the grief that followed, Meredith had lost nearly everything: weight, hope, peace. Her mother-in-law, Delphinia Collingwood, had insisted on this dinner. "Time to gather the family and move on," she'd said in that clipped, authoritative tone that had always made Meredith feel like she was being given a command rather than an invitation. A soft knock on the door startled her. "Mary, everyone's waiting." Her husband Thaddeus's voice carried a hint of impatience. "Coming," she replied, taking one last steadying breath before opening the door. Thaddeus stood there, tall and handsome in his tailored shirt, looking every bit the successful financial advisor he was. But the plastic smile that didn't reach his eyes made something in Meredith's stomach tighten. "You look better," he said, his gaze clinical rather than appreciative. Before she could respond, he turned and headed down the hallway. Meredith followed him to the dining room, where her father-in-law Horatio sat at the head of the table, flanked by Thaddeus's brothers Windsor and Gresham. Delphina was arranging something on a serving tray, her silver-streaked hair pulled into an immaculate chignon. But what made Meredith's heart skip was the blonde woman sitting casually on the far side of the table, laughing at something Gresham had said. Zephyrine Blackwell, Thaddeus's ex-girlfriend. "Meredith, darling, there you are." Delphinia's voice cut through the room. "Look who's joined us tonight. Zephyrine was in town for a conference, and we simply couldn't let her eat alone at a hotel." The look of practiced innocence on her mother-in-law's face told Meredith everything she needed to know. This wasn't coincidence. This was theater, and she was the unsuspecting audience. "How lovely," Meredith managed, taking the only available seat directly across from Zephyrine. As she settled in, her phone vibrated in her purse. Discreetly, Meredith glanced at the screen. The text from her mother, Alara, sitting just 3 seats away, made her blood run cold. "Do not eat. Just trust me." Meredith's gaze shot up to her mother, who gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head. Alara had been invited as a courtesy, or rather, to maintain appearances. The perfect family dinner with both sides represented, but now something was very, very wrong. "Please enjoy," Thaddeus said, raising his glass in a toast. "To new beginnings." Everyone raised their glasses. Meredith's hand trembled slightly as she lifted hers, her mind racing. As Delphinia began serving the main course, an elaborately prepared roast with colorful vegetables artfully arranged, Meredith observed her mother-in-law carefully. There was something almost gleeful in the way Delphinia placed a plate in front of her, a fleeting expression quickly masked with concern. "I made sure to include all your favorites, dear," Delphinia said, her voice honey-sweet but her eyes cold as winter. "You need to get your strength back." The unspoken implication hung in the air. Since you weren't strong enough to carry the baby. It wasn't the first barb Delphinia had thrown since the miscarriage. In the hospital, while nurses bustled around and Thaddeus spoke with doctors in the hallway, Delphinia had leaned close to Meredith's bed and whispered, "Some women just aren't built for motherhood. Perhaps it's nature's way of telling us something." Now, as everyone began to eat, Meredith felt the weight of eyes on her. Zephyrine was watching her with barely disguised amusement, touching Thaddeus's arm every few minutes as she reminisced about the old days. "Remember that weekend in Aspen?" Zephyrines' musical laugh filled the room. "Thaddeus nearly broke his leg trying to impress me on the Black Diamond." "Some risks are worth taking for the right person," Thaddeus replied, his smile genuine for the first time that evening. Meredith felt like she was floating outside her body, watching this carefully orchestrated humiliation play out. Her gaze met her mother's again, and Alara mouthed the words, "There's something in your plate." With sudden clarity, Meredith recalled seeing Delphinia in the kitchen earlier, hovering over the food preparation. The woman who hugged her in front of others but called her weak behind closed doors. The woman who had never accepted that Thaddeus had chosen Meredith over the accomplished, socially connected Zephyrine. And now this woman had put something in her food. Meredith maintained her composure, smiling tightly and pretending to cut her food while actually rearranging it on her plate. She waited until everyone had served themselves and started eating, making small talk about the weather and Windsor's recent promotion. "Aren't you hungry?" "Meredith?" Delphinia asked, eyes narrowing slightly. "You've hardly touched your food." "Just savoring it," Meredith replied. "Everything looks so beautiful. I almost hate to disturb it." When the conversation shifted to politics, Meredith carefully placed her phone between the water glasses, angling it so the camera could capture the table without being obvious. She hit record, needing evidence of whatever was happening. As Horatio launched into a lengthy story about his golf game, Meredith gently pushed her plate forward, as if she was simply making room for her elbows on the table. She caught her mother's eye again. Ilara knew, Meredith knew, but they didn't know exactly what they were dealing with. "Excuse me," Meredith said suddenly, pressing a hand to her stomach. "I'm not feeling well." "Oh dear," Delphinia said, her concern so perfectly performed it might have fooled anyone who hadn't seen her earlier expression. "Perhaps it's too soon for you to be out. Thaddeus, I told you she might not be ready." While attention focused on Thaddeus's defensive response, Meredith slipped a small portion of her food into a napkin and tucked it into her purse before heading to the bathroom. Once alone, she leaned against the door, heart pounding. What was happening? Was she being paranoid? Or had her mother just saved her from being poisoned by her own mother-in-law? The drive home was silent. Ilara had insisted on leaving with Meredith, claiming she had an early meeting the next day. In the car, her mother simply held her hand while Meredith fought back tears. "Mom," Meredith finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What did you see?" Ilara kept her eyes on the road. "I went to get my cardigan from the kitchen before dinner. Delphinia was by the counter with the plates. She had something in her hand, a small vial. When she saw me, she slipped it into her pocket and said she was just adding seasoning." "But you didn't believe her?" "No," Ilara said firmly. "The way she looked at me, it wasn't right. And she was only adding this seasoning to one plate. Yours." Meredith's mind flashed back through the past months. The unexplained dizziness, the constant fatigue that everyone attributed to grief, the way Thaddeus had become increasingly distant, spending more nights working late while she struggled to recover. "It wasn't just tonight, was it?" she whispered. "I don't know, honey." Ilara squeezed her hand. "But I think we need to find out." At home, Thaddeus texted that he would be staying at his parents' to smooth things over after their abrupt departure. Meredith was relieved. She needed time to think, to process what had happened. She carefully wrapped the food sample in plastic and placed it in the refrigerator. Then she paced the living room, trying to make sense of it all. Why would Delphinia want to harm her? What was there to gain? And then she remembered Zephyrine presence at the dinner. The familiar way she touched Thaddeus, the inside jokes and meaningful glances. It was past midnight when Meredith made a decision. Sitting in the soft glow of her laptop, she hesitated only briefly before typing in Thaddeus's email password. He'd shared it with her early in their marriage, a sign of trust that now felt like a distant memory. The inbox loaded, and Meredith's world shifted on its axis. There they were, dozens of emails between Thaddeus and Zephyrine, dating back over a year. She clicked on one from 3 months ago, when Meredith had been hospitalized for complications with the pregnancy. "Meet me at the usual place at 8. She'll be in for observation overnight." T. She opened another. "Mother thinks it's just a matter of time now. The doctor says her hormones are all over the place, so any emotional instability will just be blamed on the pregnancy and loss. Perfect timing, really." T. And another from just last week. Z. She'll give up soon. She barely leaves the bedroom most days. Mother's approach is working beautifully. T. Meredith felt ice spreading through her veins. She wasn't imagining things. This wasn't paranoia or grief-induced anxiety. This was real. Her husband and his mother were systematically trying to break her, and Zephyrine was waiting in the wings to reclaim her place. Meredith didn't cry. She didn't scream or throw things or call Thaddeus to confront him. Instead, she opened a new document and began to type methodically, recording every detail, every date, every suspicious incident she could remember from the past year. As the sky outside began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, Meredith came to a resolution. This wasn't a marriage anymore. It was a game, and she was about to flip the board. The business card simply read, Octavius Reed Private Investigations, with a phone number. Meredith had found it through an online search for investigators specializing in domestic cases. His reviews mentioned discretion and thoroughness. She called from a payphone at a gas station, unwilling to risk using her cell phone or home line. Reed Investigations. A deep voice answered on the third ring. I need help, Meredith said, keeping her voice steady. I believe my husband and mother-in-law are trying to poison me. There was a brief silence on the other end. Your name? The man asked. Meredith Sloan. Another pause. Longer this time. Ms. Sloan, OFM, the voice presumably Octavius Reed said carefully. I already know your name. This isn't the first complaint involving the Collingwood family. Meredith's grip tightened on the receiver. What do you mean, ma'am? You're in danger, Reed said, his tone shifting from professional to urgent. Don't eat anything that comes from that house. Don't drink anything that's been left unattended. Can you meet me in person? They arranged to meet at a quiet coffee shop 40 minutes away. Reed was easy to spot, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and watchful eyes that seemed to notice everything. He led her to a corner table far from other patrons. Before we begin, Reed said, placing a small device on the table and switching it on, this will scramble any recording attempts. Can't be too careful. Meredith nodded, her anxiety spiking. What did you mean when you said this wasn't the first complaint about the Collingwoods? Reed studied her for a moment. 3 years ago, a woman came to me with concerns about her sister who had married into the family. Different branch Thaddeus's cousin. The sister had been experiencing similar symptoms to what I suspect you're dealing with. Fatigue, confusion, memory issues. What happened to her? She died, Reed said bluntly. Ruled a suicide, but my client never believed it. By the time she hired me, most evidence was gone. I couldn't prove anything, but I kept the file open. Meredith's blood ran cold. You think they're trying to kill me? Not necessarily. I think they're trying to control you, discredit you, maybe push you toward a breakdown. Death creates investigations. A woman who appears mentally unstable and harms herself, that creates sympathy for the grieving husband. Meredith told him everything at dinner. The text from her mother, the emails she'd discovered, the gradual isolation she'd experienced since the miscarriage. I need evidence, she concluded. Real, concrete proof of what they're doing. Reed nodded, making notes in a small black book. The food sample was smart. I can have it analyzed discreetly. But we need more. Do you have any technical skills, Ms. Sloan? I worked in IT security before marriage, Meredith replied. Thaddeus didn't think it was suitable for his wife to work in such a masculine field. Reed's eyebrows rose slightly. That might be the first piece of good news I've heard. We can use those skills. Together, they developed a plan. Meredith would document everything, printing the incriminating emails, copying bank statements showing suspicious transfers to Zephyrine, recording any cruel comments from Delphinia. Most importantly, she would set up hidden surveillance in the house. They believe you're broken, Reed said. Use that to your advantage. Let them think you're too weak to fight back. Meanwhile, we'll build a case so solid they'll never escape it. That evening, while Thaddeus was at a client dinner, which Meredith now suspected involved Zephyrine, she began installing tiny cameras throughout the house. Her IT background proved invaluable. She knew how to hide the devices effectively and route the feeds to secure cloud storage that only she could access. In the master bedroom, she positioned a camera with a view of her vanity table, where she kept her vitamins and medications. In the kitchen, Another watched the refrigerator and food preparation areas. Additional cameras monitored the living room and home office. She worked methodically, using her knowledge of network security to ensure the devices wouldn't be detected on their home Wi-Fi. Every camera was carefully camouflaged inside picture frames, tucked between books, disguised as ordinary household objects. By midnight, her surveillance system was operational. No one would suspect that the seemingly defeated woman they were trying to destroy had just created an unblinking digital eye to watch their every move. 3 days passed. Meredith maintained her role as the fragile, recovering wife. She moved slowly around the house, spoke in a quiet voice, and pretended not to notice Thaddeus's increasingly thin excuses for late nights at the office. The cameras captured everything: Thaddeus rifling through her personal journals when she was out, making phone calls in hushed tones from the bathroom with the shower running, checking her browser history on their shared computer. On the fourth day, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. Through the peephole, Meredith saw her mother-in-law holding a wicker basket. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door. "Delphinia," she said, feigning surprise. "What brings you by?" "Just checking on you, sweetheart," Delphinia crooned, sweeping into the house uninvited. She was impeccably dressed as always, her cream cashmere sweater and tailored slacks a stark contrast to Meredith's simple jeans and t-shirt. "I brought cookies and flowers to brighten your day." The basket contained an arrangement of lilies and a tin of homemade chocolate chip cookies, Thaddeus's favorite. "How thoughtful," Meredith murmured, accepting the gifts. Delphinia walked around the living room, her sharp eyes taking in every detail: the unwashed coffee mug on the side table, the throw blanket crumpled on the couch, the general air of neglect that Meredith had carefully cultivated. "Feeling better?" her mother-in-law asked, her tone sweet but her eyes ice cold. "Some days are harder than others," Meredith replied truthfully. "I'll make tea," Delphinia announced. "Sit down, dear. You look exhausted." In the kitchen, Delphinia moved with the confidence of someone who considered the space partially her own. She filled the kettle, selected teacups from the cabinet, and arranged cookies on a plate while Meredith perched on a stool at the counter, watching. The hidden camera above the refrigerator captured it all, including the moment when Delphinia, thinking Meredith was looking away, removed a small vial from her purse and dropped several clear drops into one of the teacups. "Lemon or honey?" Delphinia asked pleasantly, stirring the cup with practiced nonchalance. "Both, please," Meredith said, forcing a smile. "You know how I like it sweet." When Delphinia placed the doctored cup in front of her, Meredith pretended to take a sip, careful to let her lips touch only the dry portion of the rim. "Delicious," she lied. They chatted about inconsequential things: neighborhood gossip, an upcoming charity gala, Thaddeus's father's golf game. All the while, Meredith was acutely aware of Delphinia watching her, waiting for something. "You should eat a cookie," Delphinia urged. "You're still much too thin." "I'll save them for later," Meredith said. "My appetite comes and goes." After Delphinia finally left, Meredith carefully collected the teacup, sealing it in a plastic bag without touching the liquid inside. She did the same with several cookies, then downloaded the video footage and sent everything to Reed. Within 20 minutes, he replied, "We have enough to open a formal investigation. Don't touch anything she brought. I'm sending someone to collect it all for testing." For the first time since discovering the emails, Meredith felt a surge of something other than fear or grief. It wasn't exactly triumph, the situation was too dire for that, but it was a sense of control, of agency. They had tried to make her into a victim, but they had underestimated her. That night, but Meredith did something unexpected. She cooked dinner. "I thought we could eat together," she told Thaddeus when he arrived home later than usual, smelling faintly of unfamiliar perfume. "I'm trying to get back to normal routines." Surprise flickered across his handsome face. "That's great, Mary, really great." She'd prepared his favorite meal steak with roasted potatoes and asparagus. She'd opened a bottle of expensive red wine from the cellar. She'd even put on makeup, and the dress he'd once told her brought out the green in her eyes. "I want to have your family over this weekend," she said as they ate, to make up for leaving so abruptly last time. Your mother, your father, your brothers, and she hesitated, then added with practiced casualness, maybe invite Zephyrine too. She was lovely company. Thaddeus nearly choked on his wine. Zephyrine, you want to invite her? Meredith shrugged. Why not? She's an old friend of the family, and I think I need to be more open to your past. It's part of who you are. The calculating look that passed over his face told her everything. He thought she was surrendering, accepting her place in this toxic arrangement. He thought she was finally broken. I'll arrange it, he said, unable to completely hide his eagerness. Mother will be pleased. I'm sure she will, Meredith replied, raising her glass in a toast. To new beginnings. That night, as Thaddeus slept beside her, Meredith stared at the ceiling, mentally reviewing her plan. Every detail of the upcoming dinner would be documented. Every word, every movement saved for later, for when the time was right. Her revenge would never be loud. It would be precise. For weeks, Meredith had been battling a persistent fog that seemed to envelop her mind and body. The dizziness would strike without warning while climbing the stairs, reading a book, or simply standing up from the couch. The nausea came in waves, usually in the mornings, triggering painful memories of early pregnancy. Most disturbing was the forgetfulness appointments missed, conversations forgotten, words that vanished mid-sentence. Everyone, Thaddeus, his family, even her own doctor, had attributed these symptoms to grief and emotional trauma. It's perfectly normal after what you've been through, they assured her. Meredith had begun to believe them, questioning her own perceptions, wondering if she truly was falling apart. But now, sitting in her car outside Reed's office with her hands trembling on the steering wheel, she understood the terrifying reality. It wasn't grief, it was poison. Reed had called that morning, his voice tense. I need to see you immediately. Not over the phone. Inside his Spartan office, with its metal filing cabinets and worn leather chairs, Reed laid out 3 reports on his desk. The tea and cookies from your mother-in-law, he began, tapping the first document. Both contained traces of benzodiazepines specifically, a prescription sedative that causes drowsiness, confusion, and memory issues. Low dose, but consistent exposure would produce cumulative effects. Meredith stared at the chemical analysis, the scientific terms swimming before her eyes. They've been drugging me. It appears so, but there's more. Reed slid over the second report. I had my contact analyze samples from your bathroom toothpaste, face cream, multivitamins. The vitamins contained the same substance. A cold knot formed in Meredith's stomach. The vitamins Thaddeus had been so insistent she take daily, for her health, for her recovery. How long, she whispered. Based on when your symptoms began, I'd estimate at least 6 weeks, possibly longer. Reed's expression was grim. Mrs. Sloan saw you. The substance in the cookies and tea is indeed toxic. Low dosage, but with continuous exposure. It can cause dizziness, fatigue, confusion, exactly what you've been experiencing. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. You can't stay in that house any longer. I'm forwarding these materials to a prosecutor I trust. In the meantime, make up an excuse and leave immediately. Meredith's mind raced. My mother, I could say she needs help. Perfect. Pack essentials only. Nothing that would alert them to a permanent departure. And don't take anything they have given you, no medications. No toiletries. No food items. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was survival. Back home, Meredith moved with calm efficiency, packing a small suitcase with clothes and personal items. She secured her laptop, external hard drives, and everything needed to continue monitoring the house remotely. The food sample from the dinner was carefully stored in her purse. When Thaddeus called to check in, a new habit he'd developed. Ostensibly out of concern, she was ready. My mom fell, she told him, injecting the right amount of worry into her voice. She's fractured both arms. I need to go help her for a while. Both arms, Thaddeus sounded skeptical. How did that happen? Tripped on the stairs with groceries. Meredith improvised. She can't do anything for herself. Feed herself. Dress. Basic hygiene. She needs someone there. There was a pause, then how long will you be gone? I'm not sure, a few weeks at least. Another pause. She could almost hear him calculating, weighing his options. If you want to stay longer, go ahead, he finally said, his tone deliberately casual. It might be good for you, a change of scenery. The lack of protest confirmed everything. Meredith felt a strange calm settle over her as she realized just how little her husband wanted her around. I'll call you when I get there, she promised, knowing she'd maintain the facade as long as necessary. Before leaving, she checked all the cameras one last time, ensuring they were functioning and properly hidden. Then she looked around at the home they'd built together, the photographs on the walls, the furniture they'd selected, the space that should have been filled with love, and perhaps, eventually, children's laughter. It had become a beautiful prison, and she was finally breaking free. The small apartment Meredith rented under a false name was nothing like her elegant home in the suburbs. One bedroom, bare-bones furniture, in a nondescript building where neighbors minded their own business. But it offered something priceless: safety. On her first night there, after setting up her equipment on the scratch kitchen table, Meredith accessed the surveillance system she'd installed at home. The cameras activated one by one, offering silent glimpses into the house she'd fled. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Empty rooms, stillness, then movement. Thaddeus arriving home, loosening his tie, immediately pouring a large whiskey. He made a phone call, speaking too quietly for the camera's microphone to catch. But his expression was animated, his free hand gesturing emphatically. He was smiling genuinely, smiling in a way Meredith hadn't seen in months. The next morning brought the first surprise. Delphinia arrived early, letting herself in with her own key. She moved through the house with purpose, going directly to the master bedroom, where she began methodically searching through Meredith's belongings, her dresser drawers, her closet, even the locked jewelry box that Meredith had deliberately left behind. What was she looking for? The answer came that evening when Meredith watched, stone-faced, as Zephyrin Blackwell sauntered through the front door with an overnight bag. "Darling, I brought dinner," she called out, as comfortable as if she'd lived there for years. Thaddeus appeared from the kitchen, wrapped his arms around her waist, and kissed her deeply. "Mother's handling everything," he murmured against Zephyrin's neck. "The lawyers are preparing the paperwork. Once Mary signs, we're free. And if she doesn't sign?" Zephyrin's voice was playful, but with an undercurrent of steel. "She will. She's in no condition to fight anything. And if necessary," he shrugged, "there are other options." They moved to the living room, sprawling on the couch Meredith had chosen, drinking wine from her collection, laughing about how gullible she'd been. Zephyrin even played Meredith's piano, a wedding gift from her parents, while Thaddeus watched adoringly. The pain cut deep, but it also fueled her resolve. This wasn't just about a cheating husband. This was a coordinated effort to erase her mentally, legally, perhaps even physically, from that hiding place, exiled from her own life. Meredith began documenting everything meticulously, every intrusion, every conversation, every indication of their plan. She created spreadsheets tracking Thaddeus's comings and goings, noting how he'd begun moving her personal items to the guest room. She logged Delphinia's visits, often coinciding with the arrival of official-looking envelopes that Thaddeus quickly secured in his home office safe. And Zephyrin, she was there almost constantly now, redecorating, replacing Meredith's carefully chosen items with her own, erasing all traces of the home's true owner. Using her IT skills, Meredith was able to remotely access Thaddeus's work computer during one of his overnight absences from the house. What she found confirmed her suspicions. Emails discussing company funds being diverted through a complex series of transactions, eventually landing in an account bearing Zephyrin's name. Not large amounts individually, but collectively substantial. It was time to begin dismantling their world, piece by calculated piece. Her first move was subtle but strategic, An anonymous complaint to the HR department at Thaddeus's investment firm, attaching proof of suspicious payments to Zephyrine, who coincidentally was listed as a consultant for several client accounts. A few days later, she heard through the surveillance system that Thaddeus had been placed on investigative leave. He ranted to Zephyrine about jealous coworkers and temporary misunderstandings, but Meredith could see the panic beneath his bravado. "It's just bad timing," he assured Zephyrine. "Once everything settles with Mary, we'll have plenty to live on anyway." Next, Meredith arranged for similar information to reach the ethics board at the hospital where Delphinia worked as a psychiatric nurse. The complaint was carefully worded, suggesting potential conflicts of interest and questionable professional boundaries. Within days, the ripple effects were visible. Delphinia arrived at the house in tears, telling Thaddeus that colleagues were suddenly keeping their distance. The hospital administration had called her in for meetings twice. There were whispers of an internal review. Finally, through an anonymous tip to the state financial regulator, Zephyrine received subpoenas regarding the source of funds in her consulting business. One by one, the walls were closing in, and they had no idea where the blows were coming from. Meredith's revenge was being executed with precision, leaving no fingerprints, no traces that could lead back to her. She was the ghost in their machine, systematically dismantling the facade they'd built while they scrambled to understand what was happening. A week into her self-imposed exile, Meredith received an unexpected text message from an unknown number. "Coffee tomorrow, 10 a.m., Lunar Cafe on Westbrook. Come alone." Lyric Collingwood, Thaddeus's younger sister, the only member of the family who had ever shown Meredith genuine kindness. Recently divorced herself, Lyric had always seemed uncomfortable with her mother's controlling nature, but too intimidated to openly oppose her. Meredith hesitated. It could be a trap, but something told her Lyric was acting independently. The next morning, after taking elaborate precautions to ensure she wasn't followed, Meredith arrived at the small cafe 10 minutes early. She chose a corner table with a clear view of both the entrance and the emergency exit. Lyric appeared precisely at 10, looking nervous. Always the bohemian outlier in the polished Collingwood clan, she wore a flowing dress and minimal makeup, her dark hair cut in a short, asymmetrical style that Delphinia openly despised. "Thank you for coming," Lyric said, sliding into the seat across from Meredith. "I wasn't sure you would." "Why am I here?" Meredith asked directly. Lyric glanced around before leaning forward. "I'm moving out of state next week. California, fresh start. But before I go, there's something you need to know." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small USB drive. "This is the last piece of the puzzle." "What is it?" "An audio recording I secretly captured during a family lunch 3 weeks ago." Lyric's voice trembled slightly. "After you lost the baby, I started noticing things. The way Mother would look at you when she thought no one was watching. How Thaddeus would check his phone whenever he stepped away from you. Small things, but they didn't feel right." She pushed the USB drive across the table. "So I started recording conversations when they didn't know. This one, you need to hear it." That afternoon, in the safety of her rented apartment, Meredith plugged the drive into her laptop. The audio was slightly muffled, but clear enough to distinguish the voices: Thaddeus, Delphinia, Horatio, and Zephyrine. "The papers are almost ready," Delphinia was saying. "My contact at the hospital has provided everything we need to establish a pattern of instability. And if she contests it," that was Zephyrine's voice, sharp with impatience, "she won't be in any condition to contest anything." Delphinia replied smoothly, "The supplements are working beautifully. By the time we present the divorce papers, she'll be lucky if she can remember her own name, let alone find a decent lawyer." "I just want this over with," Thaddeus said. "She's more useful alive than dead. But if she keeps getting in the way..." The sentence hung unfinished. "Someone, probably Delphinia," murmured something inaudible. Zephyrine laughed. "To new beginnings." Horatio's voice rumbled, followed by the clink of glasses. Meredith sat motionless, the blood roaring in her ears. They weren't just trying to discredit her or push her into signing unfavorable divorce terms. The implication in Thaddeus's unfinished sentence was clear if their current plan failed. They had darker alternatives in mind. This was the last straw. She sent the audio file to Reed, who immediately requested a meeting with the prosecutor he trusted. His advice was simple and direct. Keep her distance, remain completely silent about her location, and let him handle the legal aspects. "We're going to bring this down with evidence," he assured her, "but only when the time is right." The next day, Meredith created a fake profile and posted an anonymous note in a local Facebook whistleblower group. No names, but with details only someone from the house would know: specific decor items, the brand of Thaddeus's favorite whiskey, the weekly delivery of fresh flowers that Delphinia insisted upon. "In our town, a woman is being systematically drugged by her husband and mother-in-law. Medical professionals are involved. Financial crimes are being committed. The authorities have been notified, but the family's connections run deep. Who's watching the Watchmen?" In less than an hour, the post had gone viral across several local groups. Comments flooded in, speculating about which prominent family was involved. Some connected it to rumors they'd heard about the Collingwoods over the years, whispers of previous wives who'd had nervous breakdowns, of family money protected at all costs. That same night, Meredith received an anonymous message through the platform. "I know who you're talking about. This isn't the first time. Call me." A phone number followed. Her hand shook as she dialed. Was this another victim? A witness? Someone from the Collingwood social circle with a conscience? The voice that answered was female, mature, and unfamiliar. "You don't know me," she began without preamble, "but I was sitting at the cafe behind your mother-in-law, your husband, and a blonde woman last Thursday. I think you need to know what I heard." Meredith's whole body froze. "Go on." "They were discussing someone named Mary. That's you, isn't it? They talked about your recent behavior, how you're becoming increasingly paranoid, and something about a document you need to sign soon, before you get suspicious." The stranger continued, detailing a conversation that aligned perfectly with what Meredith already knew. "The blonde woman asked what they'd do if you refused to sign, and your mother-in-law said, 'We're already working on that.' Her emotional state is hanging by a thread." "Why are you telling me this?" Meredith managed to ask. "I left that cafe unable to stay quiet. If you're in danger, you deserve to know." The caller paused. "I'm a retired nurse. I've seen family abuse disguised as care before. Trust your instincts." After hanging up, Meredith verified the details. The cafe mentioned was near Thaddeus's office, using public security camera feeds accessible through Google Maps. She confirmed that Thaddeus's car had been parked there at the time specified. His credit card records, which she could access through their joint account, showed a transaction at that cafe. It was real. An independent witness had observed their plotting without any prompting or connection to Meredith. She forwarded everything to her lawyer, Phoenix Avalon, a razor-sharp family law specialist recommended by Reed. After reviewing the growing mountain of evidence, Phoenix was blunt. "You know, we already have enough for a formal complaint, but this story is still unfolding. If you want to control the narrative, this is the moment." Meredith agreed. Her revenge had to stay controlled, methodical, but it was time to let it breathe, to transform her private nightmare into whispers echoing across town. That night, she created an encrypted file with edited audio clips, transcripts, and message screenshots, without including any names or identifiable details. She sent it to 3 local Facebook groups, unsigned, with the caption, "She trusted them. They laughed. Listen and decide for yourself." The file spread like wildfire. People began connecting on, recalling the earlier anonymous post, speculating with increasing accuracy about which family was involved. Comments multiplied, some from individuals claiming to have witnessed similar behavior from the Collingwoods in other contexts. Within hours, the post had garnered hundreds of shares, and Meredith, watching from a distance, could see the first signs of fear growing in her tormentor's eyes. That night, Thaddeus called her for the first time in days. His tone was flat, but with an undercurrent of barely controlled panic. "Mary, where are you exactly? Your mother wouldn't give me the address." "I'm taking care of her, just like you suggested," Meredith replied calmly. Why some? Do you know what's going on? There are rumors all over social media. Someone's spreading lies about my family. What kind of lies? Ridiculous stuff. Poisoning, fraud, conspiracy. Someone's setting us up. They're trying to destroy us. His voice cracked slightly. You'd tell me if you knew anything, right? Meredith allowed herself a small, cold smile that he couldn't see. Maybe it's just the universe putting everyone in their rightful place. She hung up, savoring the uncertainty in his voice. It was the first crack in his armor, the first sign that he was beginning to feel even a fraction of the fear and confusion he'd inflicted on her. The game was changing. And now she was the one making the rules. The following morning, an email arrived in Meredith's inbox. No subject line, no greeting, sent from an encrypted address that couldn't be traced. You don't know me, but I was at the cafe behind your mother-in-law, your husband, and a blonde woman last Thursday. I think you need to know what I heard. The email detailed the same conversation the anonymous caller had described, but with additional specifics, exact phrases, the precise table location, even what they had ordered. The writer had been close enough to hear everything clearly. They spoke about you as if you weren't a person but a problem to solve. Your mother-in-law mentioned something called Project Restoration that would begin once you signed the papers. When the blonde asked what they'd do if you refused, your mother-in-law replied, "We're already working on it." Her emotional state is hanging by a thread. The witness continued, describing how Thaddeus had seemed nervous but determined, checking his watch repeatedly as if expecting someone. How Zephyrine had openly placed her hand on his thigh under the table, whispering something that made him flush. I left that cafe unable to sleep that night. If it were me, I'd want someone to say something. Meredith verified every detail. The cafe mentioned was indeed near Thaddeus's office. Through public security footage accessible via Google Maps, she confirmed his car had been parked nearby at the specified time. His credit card statement showed a transaction at exactly 2:17 p.m. that day, matching the timestamp the witness provided. This wasn't just confirmation of what she already knew. It was independent corroboration from a stranger who had no connection to her, no reason to lie, no stake in the outcome. With trembling hands, she forwarded the email to Phoenix Avalon. "This is gold," Phoenix said when she called to discuss it. "An independent witness makes all the difference in court. Their testimony carries weight that family accusations often don't." "What's our next move?" Meredith asked. "We compile everything, the surveillance footage, the lab results from the food and vitamins, the audio recordings, the financial transfers, and now this witness statement. We present it all to the district attorney as a complete package." Phoenix paused. "But there's something else that's been bothering me. The scale of this conspiracy seems extensive, like they've done it before." Reed suggested the same thing. "Let me do some digging into previous Collingwood family situations. There might be a pattern we can establish." Later that afternoon, Reed called with disturbing news. "We found something. A previous Mrs. Collingwood, not Thaddeus's wife, but his cousin Alexander's. She was institutionalized briefly about 5 years ago. Similar situations, sudden mental health crisis during a contentious period in their marriage. She lost custody of their children, most of her assets. Everything." "What happened to her?" Meredith asked, dreading the answer. "She's alive, but diminished, living in a small apartment in Arizona, heavily medicated. Her family tried to help, but the Collingwoods' legal team was too powerful. The documentation from her episode was comprehensive, all signed off by medical professionals who happened to be in Delphinia's professional network." The pattern was becoming clearer, more terrifying. This wasn't just family drama. It was a methodology, refined over time and used repeatedly. That evening, Phoenix called with news that made Meredith's blood run cold. "We just received an old medical file with your name on it," the lawyer said cautiously. "It came from an anonymous sender. There's something very strange about it." The document appeared in Meredith's email moments later. It bore her name, her correct birth date, and social security number, but was dated 7 years earlier before she'd even met Thaddeus. She didn't recognize the hospital listed, but the signature at the bottom stopped her cold. There it was, clear as day, Dr. Delphinia Collingwood, using her maiden name, Parker. The diagnosis read, emotional instability, possible adjustment disorder. Treatment included a brief psychiatric hold and medication, with a notation for observational conduct suggested. None of it made sense. Meredith had never been to that hospital. She would have remembered a psychiatric evaluation. And yet, there was her name, her personal information, all officially documented. She called the hospital directly, using a fake name. "I'm following up on a patient who was treated there several years ago," she said, claiming to be an administrative assistant at a doctor's office. "I need to confirm some details about her stay." The receptionist hesitated but confirmed the document existed in their system. "The treatment was brief and discreet," she said. "At the family's request, we kept minimal records." "The family," Meredith repeated, her voice faint. "Yes, that's all I can see in the notes. Family request for privacy." Meredith hung up, her mind reeling. What family could have authorized psychiatric treatment before she even knew the man who'd become her husband? Or had she known him and somehow didn't remember? With shaking hands, she dialed her mother's number. "Mom," she said when Alara answered, "I need to ask you something, and I need the absolute truth. Was I ever hospitalized for psychiatric reasons? Perhaps after the car accident in college." The silence on the other end stretched long and heavy. Then Alara exhaled shakily. "Meredith, there's something you don't know, and maybe we were never supposed to discuss it, but I think it's time." "Mom," Meredith pressed, her heart hammering against her ribs. "What aren't you telling me?" Alara's voice wavered on the other end of the line. "After your car accident in college, the bad one where you had that concussion, you went through a difficult period. You were having nightmares, panic attacks, memory issues. The doctors said it was post-traumatic stress." Meredith remembered the accident. A rainy night, a truck that ran a red light, the crunch of metal and glass. She'd spent 3 days in the hospital with a concussion and fractured ribs. The next few months were a blur of headaches and disorientation. "What happened after?" she asked, dreading the answer. "One of the doctors suggested a brief stay at a specialized facility to help manage your symptoms. You were so fragile. Sweetheart, I was terrified of losing you." Alara's voice cracked. "There was this doctor, a woman, a family acquaintance who offered to expedite the process. I trusted her because she seemed genuinely concerned. I never knew her full name, just Dr. Parker." Meredith's blood ran cold. Dr. Parker, Delphinia's maiden name. The stay was very short, just a week, and afterward, everything disappeared. No bills, no reports, nothing. It was all very strange, but you seemed so much better after. So I thought, Alara trailed on off. "I thought it was best to move on, not to remind you of that dark time." "Mom, what was the name of the facility?" When Alara told her, it matched the hospital on the mysterious medical file. "Did I sign anything?" Meredith asked. "Consent forms, treatment authorizations." "I don't think so. You were heavily sedated most of the time. I signed everything as your next of kin." The pieces were falling into horrifying place. Somehow, 7 years ago, Delphinia Collingwood had intersected with Meredith's life during her most vulnerable moment, had been given access to her when she was sedated, unable to remember details clearly, had created a record that could be manipulated later. But why? How could Delphinia have known back then that Meredith would eventually meet and marry Thaddeus? Unless the meeting hadn't been accidental at all. Meredith went back to the mysterious file, examining every detail. In the margin was a notation she'd missed initially, a small acronym, APE Assessment of Parental Eligibility. Her heart pounded. That file wasn't just about her mental health. It was a psychiatric evaluation of her fitness to be a parent. But in 2018, she hadn't even been thinking about becoming a mother. Was that added later, or had someone been planning to interfere all along? She sent the complete file to Phoenix, who called back within minutes. "This is extremely serious," the lawyer said, her usual measured tone replaced with urgency. "If your mother-in-law used her professional access to create or manipulate psychiatric reports in order to discredit you, that qualifies as a federal crime. Multiple crimes, actually falsification of medical records, practicing medicine under false pretenses, conspiracy to commit fraud. But how could she have known I'd meet Thaddeus years later? That's what we need to find out. I'm contacting the district attorney's office immediately. This goes beyond family drama or even financial crimes. This is systemic abuse of medical authority." As Meredith hung up, a chilling thought occurred to her. If Delphinia had manipulated her medical records once, what else might she have altered? What other paper trails existed that could be used against her? She needed to get ahead of this. Opening her laptop, she began drafting a new complaint, still anonymous but now focused specifically on the criminal misuse of medical records. She detailed everything: the mysterious file, Delphinia's background as a psychiatric nurse, the pattern of manipulated documents. For the first time, she included specific identifiers: initials, dates, locations, knowing that the press would eventually connect the dots. The Collingwoods were a prominent family. Once the allegations became public, others might come forward. 3 days later, an investigative journalist named Calypso Morgan sent her a direct message on the secure platform she'd been using for her anonymous posts. "I need to speak with you urgently. I know who Dr. Parker is, and what she did to you wasn't the first time." When Meredith called the number provided, Calypso's voice was steady but grave. "I've been investigating Delphinia Collingwood for years," she said without preamble. "She worked as a psychiatric nurse at Westlake Memorial, but had connections with psychiatrists and private clinics all over the state. Always involved in delicate cases involving emotionally vulnerable women." "How did you find me?" Meredith asked. "Your name appeared in a cross-referenced complaint with files from another victim. The pattern was unmistakable. You're not the first, Meredith, and you might not be the last." According to Calypso, another woman had been institutionalized against her will during a contentious divorce from a wealthy businessman. The woman's substantial inheritance had been at stake, and the person who had arranged everything with the hospital, Delphinia Collingwood. "She seems to follow a pattern," Calypso continued. "Custody battles, inheritance disputes, estate conflicts, always positioning herself on the side of whoever wants to eliminate the woman from the equation. Usually wealthy men with something to protect." This wasn't just a personal vendetta against Meredith. It was a calculated operation that had been perfected over years. "I'm working on an expose," Calypso said. "The story is nearly ready, but it needs a current victim with solid documentation. Someone whose case is active and verifiable." Meredith thought carefully. Going public meant stepping out of the shadows, potentially exposing herself to retribution. But staying silent meant Delphinia would continue her predatory behavior with other vulnerable women. "I'll help," she decided. "Not just for revenge, but because if I do not speak up, she'll do to someone else what she did to me." Meredith sent everything: surveillance footage, lab reports, financial records, audio recordings, and most crucially, the falsified medical documents. Within 24 hours, Calypso had cross-referenced her story with 2 other women who had experienced similar manipulation at Delphinia's hands. 3 different lives, connected by one name, Delphinia Collingwood. Meanwhile, the consequences of Meredith's earlier actions were spreading. Thaddeus's company had officially suspended him pending investigation into financial improprieties. Zephyrin had been summoned to testify about receiving funds from questionable sources, and Delphinia had disappeared, gone from the house, the hospital, her social circles. No one knew where she was, but Meredith suspected she was hiding, waiting for the storm to pass, unaware of how massive the brewing tempest had become. Meredith was called to give an official statement at the district attorney's office. She brought everything: original documents, medical reports, financial records, screenshots, audio files. The room fell silent during her testimony, the gravity of the situation evident in the prosecutor's expressions. When she mentioned Delphinia Collingwood by name, One of the prosecutors exchanged a meaningful glance with Reed. "That woman's name has come up in other cases," he said quietly. "Always through third parties, never directly. That's about to change." As Meredith left the building, she found an envelope stuck to her car's windshield. Heavy cream paper, no name. Inside was a clipping from an old newspaper, a photo of Delphinia smiling beside a distinguished-looking older man in a doctor's coat. On the back, handwritten, "She's destroyed entire families, but you could be the last." The man in the photo was identified as Dr. Arthur Bellman, chief of psychiatry at Westlake Memorial from 2010 to 2018. This confirmed everything. Someone else was helping her, someone on the inside of the medical establishment who had witnessed Delphinia's machinations and wanted them exposed. With each step Meredith took, her quest for justice became more collective, more powerful, more inevitable. 3 days later, Calypso's expose went live in a major regional newspaper. Nurse with ties to psychiatric clinics, suspected of manipulating diagnoses to influence inheritance in legal cases. While the article didn't mention Meredith by name, anyone familiar with the Collingwood family could read between the lines. The piece detailed a pattern of vulnerable women being institutionalized or diagnosed with mental health conditions during periods of legal conflict with wealthy men. In each case, Delphinia Collingwood had been involved, often as a consulting nurse who facilitated admissions and treatment plans. The impact was immediate. Thaddeus's phone exploded with calls from colleagues and acquaintances. Zephyrine deleted all her social media accounts. Delphinia didn't respond to a single journalist's inquiry, but someone answered for her. And that was the most disturbing development. At midnight that same day, Meredith received a call from a restricted number. The voice on the other end wasn't Delphinia's. It was a man's deep, measured, and coldly threatening. "You've messed with people bigger than you realize," he said without introduction. "Be careful what comes next." Then silence. For the first time since beginning her campaign for justice, Meredith felt genuine fear, but she'd gone too far to back down now. The call put her on high alert. She tightened her digital security, activated two-factor authentication on everything, and scrubbed her online footprint. She told Phoenix and Reed about the threat, and Reed immediately arranged for additional security measures. "You're dealing with people who have connections," he warned. "But you're more protected than you think. We have the district attorney involved now, and the press. They can't silence everyone." It was a precarious balance, fear and power in equal measure. Reviewing the documents she'd collected, Meredith noticed a detail she'd overlooked: a mailing address that appeared in two different victims' files. It belonged to the Bellman Medical Foundation, an organization that appeared inactive based on its outdated website. On the contact page, she recognized one of the listed directors, the same Dr. Bellman from the old photograph with Delphinia. She sent this new information to Calypso, who was stunned. "If this checks out, the story goes national," the journalist said. "The foundation received millions in donations over the years. If there's medical fraud tied to financial gain, we're looking at a major scandal." The pieces were fitting together. Delphinia wasn't working alone. She was part of a larger system, a silent enabler who used her position to manipulate records, destroy reputations, and protect the interests of those willing to pay. Meanwhile, Thaddeus was unraveling. He called Meredith daily, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails. "Mary, you need to come home," he pleaded in the latest message. "Things are getting out of control. We need to talk face to face." His voice had lost its confidence, replaced by the tone of a cornered man. But Meredith knew it wasn't guilt driving him, it was fear. Fear of exposure, fear of losing his position, fear of legal consequences. He wasn't thinking about her. He never had. Delphinia remained missing, but the investigation moved forward relentlessly. The nursing board suspended her license pending the outcome. The hospital launched an internal review of all cases she'd been involved with. The Bellman Foundation was notified of potential legal action. Calypso published a second article featuring testimonials from newly discovered victims, women who, like Meredith, had been forcibly diagnosed, discredited, and pushed out of their own lives. It wasn't just a personal vendetta anymore. It was a pattern being brought to light after years in the shadows. Even with all the progress, something still bothered Meredith: the signature on her falsified medical file. It wasn't digital. It was handwritten, with distinctive flourishes that seemed vaguely familiar. On a hunch, she retrieved the domestic partnership contract she'd signed with Thaddeus before their wedding, which she'd kept in a safe deposit box. Comparing the two documents side by side, the similarity was unmistakable. The same curve in the P, the same slant in the H. This wasn't a coincidence. She had signed a document drafted by Delphinia. Digging deeper into her hard drive, Meredith found a folder containing scans of their original wedding paperwork, including earlier drafts of the contract. In the initial version, there had been standard provisions for community property, but in the final signed version, the one that had been filed there, was an additional clause stipulating that in the event of divorce, each party would retain only what they had brought into the marriage. Given that Thaddeus had come from wealth and Meredith had been building her career, this clause effectively left her with nothing. She had been manipulated from the start. By him, by Delphinia, by all of them. What she had thought was a love story had been scripted as a trap. Phoenix confirmed her suspicions after reviewing the documents. "This is contract fraud," she said bluntly. "The signature page you signed appears to have been attached to a different version of the agreement than what you reviewed. That's illegal, and it invalidates the entire contract." Meredith sat in silence, feeling her throat tighten. "I want to annul the partnership," she said finally. "Not just divorce him, I want it erased, as if it never happened." "With this evidence, we can do that," Phoenix assured her. "But it's going to expose everything: his infidelity, his mother's manipulation, the financial deception. Are you prepared for that?" "More than prepared," Meredith said. "It's what I've been working toward." She hired a forensic handwriting expert who confirmed what she already suspected. The handwriting on her medical file matched Delphinia's signature on various documents, including the witness line of the marriage contract. "Your mother-in-law's signature appears disguised as a witness on multiple legal documents," the expert reported. "She interfered in sections that would have significant financial and legal implications for you." With this evidence, Phoenix filed for annulment of the domestic partnership contract on grounds of fraud, coercion, and falsification of documents. "You're not just keeping your rights," Phoenix told her. "You're becoming the name on the case that will set precedent for other women in similar situations." That night, Meredith took another strategic step. She uploaded all her evidence to a secure cloud server, then shared access with two independent journalists from different states. No face-to-face meetings, no recorded conversations, just documented facts. The files were meticulously labeled by date, location, and record type. There was no way to cover it up anymore, even if something happened to Meredith. The truth would still emerge. On the Collingwood side, panic was evident. Zephyrin had completely disappeared from social media. Delphinia's phone was disconnected, and Thaddeus had resorted to contacting Alara, claiming he was worried about Meredith's mental state. Alara's response, which she proudly related to Meredith, was succinct. "Meredith isn't crazy. She's just not quiet anymore." For the first time, Meredith felt her mother truly understood what she was fighting against, and it gave her renewed strength. Reed updated her on the investigation's progress. Delphinia had been located in another state, staying with a distant cousin. She was attempting to spin the story as defamation against a dedicated medical professional, but Calypso was already on her way there to investigate further. The prosecutor's office had been notified, and victims were beginning to speak out publicly. It was the beginning of a fall that would be slow, painful, and far more devastating than a single scandal. But the threats continued. Meredith received another message, this time by mail, an envelope containing a single sheet of expensive stationery. On it, just one sentence: "You will lose everything if you continue." And in the footer, an embossed name that made her shiver: Arthur Bellman, attorney at law. That meant Delphinia still had powerful allies, and the battle was far from over. The next morning, Meredith woke to a notification on her phone. One of the folders she'd shared in the cloud had been downloaded more than 20,000 times in under 6 hours. The truth was spreading exponentially. But along with this success came another alert: someone had attempted to hack into her bank account. This wasn't coincidence. It was retaliation. What the Collingwoods and their allies didn't know was that Meredith's next move was already underway, and it wasn't coming from her. The attempted bank hack made one thing clear: they were desperate and dangerous. But what came next was even more unexpected. Meredith received an encrypted email with no identifiable sender. Inside was a single PDF attachment. In one line, "She destroyed my career, but not my memory." The file was a comprehensive report signed by Dr. Evander Thornhill, a former colleague of Delphinia's at Westlake Memorial. Dr. Thornhill had been dismissed years earlier, falsely accused of ethical violations after attempting to report concerns about Delphinia's practices. In meticulous detail, he described how Delphinia had falsified assessments, altered prescriptions, and suggested diagnoses to benefit relatives of influential patients. He had documentation notes, emails, even recorded conversations where Delphinia discussed adjusting a patient's condition to align with a family member's wishes. "I tried to report her at the time," he wrote. "I was silenced, fired, blacklisted. But seeing your case gaining traction, I can no longer remain quiet." Meredith forwarded the report to Phoenix and Calypso, both of whom confirmed its authenticity. The content was damning: altered patient records, written instructions signed by Delphinia, and email exchanges where she suggested temporarily sedating patients to facilitate signing consent forms. This wasn't just family drama anymore. It was organized, systematic abuse of vulnerable individuals. Calypso published her third article, this time with Delphinia Collingwood's full name and professional history prominently featured. The impact was immediate and widespread. The story was picked up by national outlets. The state medical board issued a formal statement expressing concern. Westlake Memorial Hospital released a press statement claiming they were shocked and dismayed by the allegations. And most significantly, the Bellman Foundation's accounts were frozen pending a complete audit. Through it all, Meredith remained publicly silent. Her presence was more powerful when invisible, a shadow force driving justice forward without becoming a target herself. On the personal front, Thaddeus finally cracked. He called Meredith in tears, begging for forgiveness, claiming he had no idea how far his mother's manipulations had gone. He insisted he'd only reconnected with Zephyrine because he was weak and trapped between two forceful women. Meredith listened in silence, and when he finished, she said simply, "You weren't trapped, Thaddeus. You were comfortable." Then she hung up, knowing that his guilt could never erase the damage he had willingly participated in. With the evidence they'd gathered, Phoenix filed a comprehensive legal action: contract annulment, damages for emotional distress, and a request to freeze both Thaddeus's and Delphinia's assets. The judge granted the request immediately, recognizing the substantial risk of assets being hidden or transferred. Within 72 hours, their accounts were frozen. The beach house they had flaunted as a symbol of their success was hastily put on the market. But it was too late. Delphinia's criminal record had been officially opened, and the Collingwood downfall was now public knowledge. Still, the war wasn't over. Meredith received a new threat: an extrajudicial notice accusing her of defamation, signed by Arthur Bellman himself. Her response was strategic silence, followed by submitting everything to the prosecutor's office. "They tried to flip the game," Reed told her. "Now we speed it up." At the end of the day, Calypso called with news that shifted the entire landscape of the case. "During an interview with someone from Delphinia's past, I uncovered something that changes everything," the journalist said, her voice tense. "This isn't just about manipulation or fraud. There's evidence suggesting patient deaths may be involved." "What?" Meredith felt the blood drain from her face. "The woman I interviewed was the niece of a patient who died in 2016. The case was filed as cardiac arrest, but the circumstances were suspicious. The victim had just initiated divorce proceedings against a wealthy businessman. A large inheritance was at stake." "Let me guess. Meredith said slowly. Delphinia was involved. She was listed as the consulting nurse who administered the final dose of medication. The doctor who signed off on the death certificate was none other than Arthur Bellman. For the first time, the term involuntary euthanasia entered the conversation. There was no definitive proof, but the patterns were too consistent to ignore. And now, with public exposure bringing more victims forward, a horrifying structure was being revealed, one that had been carefully protected for decades. The prosecutor's office intensified their investigation, cross-referencing Delphinia's former patients with family litigation records. The overlaps were undeniable. This woman had been manipulating the system for years, positioning herself as the silent facilitator of countless family tragedies. And Meredith had been one of her latest targets. But unlike others before her, Meredith had fought back. The next morning, Reed called with unexpected news. The district attorney wants you to testify at a public hearing. They want you to be the face of this case. Meredith's stomach turned. She'd spent months operating from the shadows, her entire strategy built on anonymity, but now her visible presence could protect other women, could lend credibility to victims who might otherwise be dismissed. I'll do it, she decided. Not as a victim, but as someone who survived what was meant to destroy her. At the hearing, Meredith spoke with quiet authority. She presented each piece of evidence methodically: the contract discrepancies, the falsified medical records, the systematic poisoning disguised as care. As she finished her testimony, she noticed something unexpected. Women in the audience watching her with expressions of recognition and relief. One of them approached her afterward, gripping her arm with trembling fingers. "She almost did this to me too," the woman whispered. "No one believed me." That moment broke something in Meredith, the realization that her pain had become a shield for others, her voice speaking for those who had been silenced. 2 weeks later, Delphinia was formally indicted on multiple charges, including falsification of medical records, conspiracy to commit fraud, practicing medicine without proper licensing, and criminal endangerment. The district attorney described it as one of the most complex medical and financial manipulation schemes in recent years. Thaddeus faced charges of his own financial fraud, conspiracy, and criminal endangerment. Zephyrin was charged as an accomplice. And most significantly, the Bellman Foundation was dissolved by court order, its assets frozen pending investigation into potential criminal misuse of funds. Every piece fell, just as Meredith had planned, but without ever raising her voice too soon or too loudly. Meredith returned to her house alone, the house that had been hers from the start, but that they had tried to take from her. She walked through each room slowly, touching surfaces, opening windows, reclaiming the space. Over the next few days, she redecorated, erasing all traces of the Collingwoods. She replaced the bedding, rearranged the furniture, and hung new art on the walls, including a framed copy of the lawsuit with her name at the top. It was more than justice. It was proof that she had survived, and that they would never make her question her sanity again. The following week, she received a letter with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of high-quality paper with delicate handwriting. "I just wanted to be heard. You were aware." It was from Lyric, the only Collingwood brave enough to walk away before everything collapsed. Meredith kept the letter in her bedside drawer, a reminder that even in the most toxic environments, integrity could survive. In the days after the convictions, the silence in her home felt different. It wasn't oppressive anymore. It was peaceful, healing. For the first time in years, Meredith could walk through her house without remembering every poisoned moment disguised as routine. Revenge had cleared the ground, but rebuilding required different skills. Learning to live again was harder than planning their downfall. Because revenge had given her focus and purpose, now she had freedom, but also the responsibility to create something new from the ashes of betrayal. She began therapy with a trusted professional recommended by Phoenix, someone with no connections to the Collingwoods or their network. Slowly, she began to understand that justice heals wounds but doesn't erase scars. The betrayal would always be part of her story, but it didn't have to define her future. Her relationship with Alara deepened. Their conversations, once strained by unspoken tensions, became gentle explorations of truth. Her mother apologized for the past, for trusting the wrong people, for not seeing the danger sooner. "I'm so proud that you didn't lose your mind through all this," Ilara said during a quiet dinner at Meredith's newly reclaimed home. "I did lose it," Meredith replied thoughtfully, "just in a lucid, controlled way, and that's what saved me." They both cried, healing the silence that had existed between them for too long. Calypso reached out to share news that her series of articles had been nominated for a National Journalism Award. But more importantly, she wanted to thank Meredith for demonstrating that not every revenge is loud. Some are made of files, patience, and courage. More women had come forward after Meredith's testimony. Cases had been reopened. The name Delphinia Collingwood, once feared, now caused revulsion within medical institutions across the state. Meredith began writing again, not for publication, but for herself. She documented everything, creating a personal record so she would never forget, never accept so little from anyone again. One evening, as she sat on her porch watching the sunset, her phone chimed with a message from Lyric. "I'm having a baby girl next month. I'm naming her Meredith, a different spelling, because you showed me what strength without shouting looks like." Tears filled Meredith's eyes. It wasn't about glory or vindication anymore. It was about knowing that her pain hadn't been wasted. That someone who had witnessed it all understood there was life after abuse and justice after silence. Some nights she still woke up startled, her body remembering what it felt like to be trapped in a hostile place. But now she would get up, breathe deeply, and remind herself, "I got out. They tried to destroy me from the inside, but ended up exposed from the outside." Her revenge hadn't turned her into a villain. It had freed her from guilt and self-doubt. Because when we suffer in silence, the world calls us dramatic. When we speak out, they call us crazy. But when we win, there's nothing left for them to say. One day, 6 months after the trials concluded, Meredith met someone new, a kind, thoughtful man who listened more than he spoke and who respected her boundaries without being asked. He knew her story, every painful chapter, and still chose to walk beside her, not to lead or control her. Together they planted flowers in her garden and nurtured a peace that once seemed impossible. As spring turned to summer, Meredith realized that the most powerful part of her revenge wasn't bringing down the Collingwoods, it was reclaiming her ability to trust, to hope, and to build something beautiful from the ruins of betrayal. "I live in a beautiful home wrapped in quiet," she wrote in her journal, "the kind that comforts, not threatens. I've relearned how to eat without fear, sleep without triple locking the door, laugh out loud without looking over my shoulder. My life is whole again, not despite what happened, but because I refuse to let it define me." The warning text that had saved her life had become the first line of a new chapter, one that she was writing on her own terms, free from manipulation, filled with hard-won wisdom and genuine connection. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was hers, and that made all the difference.